For 3,000 years, the galaxy had known nothing but quiet. Not the quiet of empty space, but the deep, satisfied silence of a job finished. After the last of the great interstellar wars had burned out its final star, the major species of the Orion Arm had gathered on a neutral world called Veridius. There, they signed what historians would later call the Eternal Accords. Trade routes stabilized. Borders became lines on old maps. Young officers from a dozen species grew bored in peacetime academies. Children were born, lived, and died without ever hearing the sound of a warship's alarm. Humanity was not present at the signing of the Eternal Accords. At that time, humans had barely figured out how to boil water for steam engines. Their first scratchy radio signals were still stumbling through the void like newborn calves learning to walk. By the time humanity reached the stars, the galaxy had already decided that war was an outdated habit, like sharpening teeth or storing food in cheek pouches. The great species, the Xylosians with their crystal cities, the Thren with their hive memory, the silent and ancient Vorn looked at these new bipeds and smiled politely. They gave humanity a seat at the table. They offered technology. They shared art and philosophy. And for 3 centuries, humanity sat at that table quietly. They learned. They listened. They built beautiful floating gardens on Mars and turned Venus into a network of cloud cities that poets from the Thren called dreams, made of metal and mist. Humans married aliens. They wrote symphonies that blended the resonant hum of Xylosian crystal with the deep drumming of Thren pheromone pulses. They seemed, to all outside eyes, to have fully integrated into the peaceful galaxy, but the old powers never truly let humanity forget its place. The Xylosian Council, which had ruled the central trade lanes for over 8,000 years, treated humans as charming apprentices. The Thren hive mind, which controlled information flow across 50 sectors, allowed humans to access only the second tier of their archives. And the Vorn, the silent watchers who had not spoken a word in 6,000 years, but whose single ancient warship could crack a planet, simply ignored humanity altogether. They did not hate humans. They did not fear them. They simply did not consider them worth noticing. That was their mistake. The war did not begin with a bang. It began with a dispute over a mining claim in the Kessel Expanse, a messy cloud of dust and heavy metals where a human corporation had found a vein of hyperdense ore. The Xylosians claimed the sector under an ancient treaty. The Thren claimed it under a newer one. The humans, who had been quietly mining there for 12 years, claimed it because they were already there and had built a small rotating habitat shaped like a pinnacone. Negotiations dragged on for 3 standard years. Human diplomats were patient. They offered compromises. They offered to split the ore 3 ways. They offered to leave entirely if compensated for their infrastructure. The Xylosians and the Thren, used to dealing with each other, kept pushing for better terms. They assumed the humans would eventually fold because that was what smaller species did. They folded. They accepted their place. That was the natural order. Then a Thren war fleet, consisting of 67 battle cruisers and a hive carrier, jumped into the Kessel Expanse and simply took the mining station. They did not fire a shot. They did not need to. They docked, announced that the Thren hive was assuming control under emergency resource provisions, and expected the humans to file a formal complaint through the proper channels. The human station manager, a woman named Alara Vance from the Jovian moons, did not file a complaint. She sent a single message to Earth. It said, "They took the Pinnacone." 3 hours later, the Thren fleet received a priority transmission from the human diplomatic mission on Thren Prime. The message was short. It said, "Return the station within 24 local hours, or we will consider this an act of war." The Thren hive mind, which processed this message across its billion-linked consciousness, actually paused. It had to check its own historical records. The word war had not been used in a formal diplomatic communication for over 3,000 years. The Thren did not even have a standing military anymore. They had a peace enforcement division, which mostly broke up bar fights between Xylosian merchants and Vorn pilgrims. The idea of a species declaring war over a mining station seemed not just aggressive, but absurd. Like threatening to duel someone over a parking spot, the Thren did not respond. They assumed the humans were bluffing. 24 hours passed. The Thren fleet remained at the Pinnacone station. Human workers had been ferried to the surface of a nearby moon. where they sat in pressurized tents and watched the Thren ships through cheap telescopes. Then humanity did something that no species in the Orion Arm had done in 3,000 years. They mobilized. It started quietly. Across the solar system, old doors opened. On Mars, the great foundries beneath Olympus Mons, which had been producing luxury shuttle parts and medical equipment, retooled in 6 hours. On Venus, the Cloud City engineers opened sealed hangars that had not seen light into centuries. On Earth, beneath the quiet fields of Nebraska and the calm waters of the Pacific, massive elevator shafts began lifting warships that had been sleeping in dry dock since before humanity met the Xylosians. The galaxy had forgotten something fundamental about humans. They had not built those ships during the peacetime. They had built them before peacetime. They had built them in the long, dark centuries when humanity was alone in the universe, with no aliens to help and no treaties to protect them. They had built them because they knew, in their bones, that peace was a fragile thing. And when the aliens finally came, with open arms and smiling faces, the humans did not throw away their old tools. They just put them in storage. The first sign the galaxy had that something was wrong came from the jump point near Proxima Centauri. A Xylosian freighter captain, making a routine hop to Alpha Centauri, dropped out of FTL and found herself staring at a wall of metal. Not a fleet, a wall. Thousands of ships, arranged in a formation that had no name in any Xylosian tactical manual, because no Xylosian had ever needed to think about fighting a fleet that large. They were not beautiful ships. They had no crystal spires or elegant curves. They looked like weapons that had been designed by people who expected to use them. The Xylosian captain broadcast a hailing signal. She received no answer, but she did receive a system-wide text message, repeated on all frequencies, in every known language. It said, "The Thren Hive has 24 hours to vacate the Kessel Expanse and return all human property. After that, we will remove them." The Thren Hive mind, now fully aware of the human fleet, calculated the odds. Even with its outdated tactical models, the calculation came back clear. The human fleet was large, but the Thren had numbers. They could recall reserve ships from their outer sectors. They could ask the Xylosians for support. They could then. The second wave dropped out of FTL. This one came from the direction of the Oort cloud. It was twice the size of the first wave. Then a third wave from the galactic north. Then a fourth from below the ecliptic plane. The Thren hive mind stopped calculating. It began to feel something it had not felt in 3,000 years. It felt fear, but the Thren were proud. They were one of the founding species of the Eternal Accords. They could not simply run from a species that had been flying between stars for only 300 years. So the hive mind made a decision. It ordered the fleet at the Pinnacone station to hold position. It activated the Peace Enforcement Division's reserve ships. It sent a formal request to the Xylosian Council for assistance under the mutual defense clauses of the Eternal Accords clauses, so old that most Xylosian clerks had to look them up. The Xylosians, after a day of frantic debate, agreed to help. They sent a fleet of their own. It was a beautiful fleet, all white and gold, with crystalline hulls that refracted starlight into rainbows. Their ships were designed to intimidate through elegance, to show that the Xylosians were too civilized for ugly warships. They had not fired a weapon in anger in over 2,000 years. The combined Thren-Xylosian fleet assembled near the Kessel Expanse. It was the largest military formation seen in the Orion Arm since the last of the Old Wars. Propaganda broadcasts went out across the galaxy, showing the gleaming ships side by side, their captains exchanging formal bows, their crews looking confident and serene. The message was clear. Civilization would protect itself from these upstarts. Humanity's response came in the form of a single ship. It was not a large ship. It was not a beautiful ship. It looked like a brick with engines. Its hull was pitted and scarred, not from battle, but from age. It had been built in the dry docks of Titan over 400 years ago, back when humans were still fighting each other over the asteroid belt. It was called the Last Argument. The Last Argument jumped into the center of the combined Thren-Xylosian fleet and stopped. It did not fire. It did not send a message. It simply sat there, rotating slowly, as if admiring the view. The Thren flagship hailed it. "Unidentified human vessel. You are in violation of a restricted military zone. Identify yourself and state your intent." The Last Argument replied with a single sentence. "We are here to remind you of something you forgot." Then every ship in the human fleet, all 10,000 of them, jumped into the same space simultaneously. It was not an attack. It was not even a threat, not in the traditional sense. It was a demonstration. The human ships did not target the Thren or Xylosian vessels. They simply appeared, in perfect formation, surrounding the combined fleet on every axis. Above, below, left, right, ahead, behind. There was no gap. There was no escape route. There was no room to maneuver. The Thren hive mind, for the first time in its existence, lost connection to several of its ships because the sheer density of human warships was causing interference with the quantum communication links. The Xylosian captains, trained in peacetime tactics that emphasized graceful retreats and negotiated disengagements, froze. Their beautiful ships were surrounded by ugly, functional, weapon-heavy vessels that had clearly been designed by people who expected to be shot at. Then the human fleet opened a channel to every ship in the region. A single human voice spoke. It was an older voice, worn and tired, like a farmer who had spent too many seasons in the sun. It said, "We are the humans. You have enjoyed 3,000 years of peace because you forgot how to fight. We have spent 3,000 years learning, not because we wanted war, because we knew that peace only exists as long as someone is willing to defend it. You took our station. You ignored our warnings. You called our bluff. We do not bluff." The channel went silent. Then the voice returned, softer this time. "Return the Pinnacone. Go home, and remember that we are here." The Thren hive mind held a vote. It took less than a second. The vote was unanimous. The Thren fleet at the Pinnacone station undocked immediately, leaving behind every piece of human equipment. They did not even take their own docking clamps. They just left. The Xylosian fleet, seeing the Thren retreat, did the only thing they could do. They followed. The human fleet did not pursue. They did not fire a single shot. They simply waited until every alien ship had jumped away. Then they began the slow process of returning to their hidden bases. The last argument remained behind for a moment, floating alone in the empty space where the combined fleet had been. Then it, too, jumped away. The galaxy woke up the next day to a new reality. The 3,000-year era of peace was over. Not because war had returned, but because the threat of war had returned. And standing at the center of that threat, calm and unbothered, were the humans. The Xylosian Council held emergency sessions for a month. The Thren hive mind began reactivating old military protocols that had been gathering digital dust for millennia. The Vorn, the Silent Watchers, finally spoke. They sent a single word to every species in the Orion Arm. The word was interesting, but the humans did not celebrate. They did not gloat. They went back to their floating gardens and their cloud cities and their quiet lives. They returned the last argument to its dry dock beneath the Pacific Ocean. They reopened the factories on Mars for luxury shuttle parts. They went back to writing symphonies and marrying aliens and being, by all appearances, the same friendly, peaceful species they had always been, except now, when a Xylosian merchant argued with a human trader over prices. The merchant smiled a little wider and agreed a little faster. When a Thren information broker offered a human a data package, the price was always fair. And when the Vorn, for the first time in 6,000 years, sent an ambassador to Earth, the humans welcomed him with tea and cookies and asked about his journey. The ambassador, a creature made of slow-moving gas and ancient light, looked at the humans for a long time. Then he said, "You are not peaceful. You are patient. There is a difference." The human ambassador, a woman named Marcus, who had grown up on a farm in Kenya, smiled. "We learned patience," she said, "from waiting 3,000 years for someone to test us." The Vorn ambassador rippled in what might have been laughter. "And now that they have tested you?" The human ambassador picked up her teacup. "Now they know," she said, "that the era of peace didn't break because we were weak. It broke because they forgot we were strong. And we are still here, unfazed, unchanged, unwilling to start a war, but very, very ready to finish one." The Vorn ambassador said nothing more. He simply drifted back to his ship and left. But before he departed, he sent one more message to the galaxy. 2 words this time: leave them alone. And the galaxy, for the first time in 3,000 years, listened. The humans went back to their gardens. They went back to their music. They went back to being the quiet, friendly, unremarkable species that everyone underestimated. But in the deep places of the solar system, in the dry docks and the hidden foundries and the sealed hangars, the machines kept running. The ships kept sleeping. The old weapons kept waiting because the humans knew something that the galaxy had forgotten. Peace is not the absence of war. Peace is the absence of anyone stupid enough to start one. And as long as humanity existed, no one in the Orion Arm would ever be that stupid again. 3,000 years of peace had broken. But a new era had begun. Not an era of war. An era of respect. And that, the humans thought, was much, much better. The threat never returned to the Kessel Expanse. The Xylosian Council quietly rewrote their mining treaties to include human veto power over any claim within 10 light-years of human space. The Vorn, who had not spoken in 6,000 years, began speaking regularly mostly to humans. They asked questions about farming and music and why humans kept pets. The humans answered honestly, because they had nothing to hide. They were not conquerors. They were not crusaders. They were just people who had learned, a very long time ago, that the universe was not safe, and that the only way to be safe was to be too dangerous to attack, and so the galaxy settled into a new normal. The humans remained unfazed. The aliens remained watchful. And the Pinnacone Station, that little rotating habitat shaped like a pinnacone, continued to mine hyperdense ore. Its human workers went back to work the day after the fleet left. They brewed coffee in the zero-G cafeteria. They complained about the air recyclers. They lived their lives. One of them, a young engineer from the Jovian moons, asked the station manager, Elara Vance, if she had been scared when the Thren fleet first arrived. Elara thought about it. She remembered standing in the control room, watching 67 alien warships dock with her station. She remembered the cold feeling in her stomach. She remembered sending that message to Earth.